So my name is Ajit Alexander. I run the Get to Production team that takes a lot of customers live, particularly the big brand name ones that help us learn just from how complex they are. What we have today as a session for you folks is we've been working over the last year and a half on some fairly huge customers, and a lot of the questions that they end up asking are indicative of what your customers will start asking as well. A lot of the more complicated, gnarly areas of B2C tend to be around migration of users, integration of MFA, all these sorts of things. So we feel like we've learned a lot in our journey over the last year and a half of deploying customers around the hotspots. So today, what we kind of want to do over the next 2 hours is show you a lot of the patterns that we've experienced, that we've ended up coming to some sort of stable architecture on, and then solicit your feedback on what you've been seeing in terms of what's tough, what do you need more help with, and all of those things. So on my team here, I have Harsh Asija, who will take on the second half of our session talking about broader patterns, and then Yoel, who has most recently been working with a very, very large football organization that has, well, it may not even be the football organization you're thinking about, that has on the order of millions and millions of users to migrate. So he's our resident guru on all things migration patterns. So I'll hand it off to these guys to walk you through it, and hopefully you'll be bleeding out of your brains a little bit when we're done, but it's all good.
Thank you, Ajit, and thank you everyone for joining the session. And in this session, I'm going to show you how to migrate existing accounts from a variety of identity providers to Azure Active Directory B2C. The agenda for this session, on the left side, we'll talk regarding the migration process, the pre-migration, just-in-time migration, and choose the right migration path, social accounts migration, using Graph API in order to migrate the users, and we will have 2 demos, one for pre-migration, and the second one is regarding just-in-time migration. When you plan to migrate your identity provider to Azure B2C, you may also need to migrate the existing user accounts. It can be social accounts, can be local accounts, but eventually we want to have to migrate the user from one identity provider to Azure Active Directory B2C. So the first question, before we start talking regarding the migration process, do you have access to your user's password? This is the most important question regarding the migration process, because we have 2 main scenarios. Okay, the first scenario that we do have access to the password in a clear text format, or the passwords are encrypted, but we can decrypt the password. On the other end, we have a scenario that we don't have access to the password. For example, the password stored in hash format, a one-way encryption, or the password stored in any external identity provider. So we don't have access to the password, but you do have a way to verify if the credentials are valid. So let's start with the pre-migration process flow. Azure B2C allows you to migrate users through a Graph API. Some of you have been in the session of using Graph API. So you simply read the data from your old identity provider and create the users in Azure Active Directory using Graph API. It's very simple. It's just 50 lines of code, and you migrate the users. And so migrate user with existing password. This is a simple flow when we do have access to the password. So again, we only need to read the user data from the identity provider, the email address, the password, and the profile. We read all the data and create for each account. We create a account in Azure Active Directory B2C. At the very moment we finish the migration process, immediately the user can sign in and using the system. So it's very smooth migration path. The second one is related to a case when we don't have access to the user to the password, and we still create the user account. Okay. Even if we don't have the password, we generate a random password and asking the user, okay, we switch from one identity provider to a new identity provider, and we want you to change your password. Okay? In this flow, we're reading the user data from the old identity provider. We create a new account in Azure Active Directory B2C, but using a random password, not the real one, a random password, because we don't have access to the user's password. And after the migration process, we ask the user, okay, change your password using B2C change password policy. We just send them a URL to change their password. The third option, migrate users with password harvesting. It means that when we plan to move from one identity provider to Azure Active Directory B2C identity provider, we can force the user on the old identity provider. We can force the user and ask them, okay, you must change password. And when the user clicks on the change my password, again, in the old identity provider, we write the information to two repositories. First, to the old identity provider, we update the password. And second, we create a new user account in Azure Active Directory B2C with the password that provided by the end user. So for pre-migration process, we have three scenarios. I'm repeating. Okay, the first one is migrate users with existing password. This is the easy one because we only need to create an account with the password we already have. The second one, when we don't have the password, we force the user to change the password and we reset the password in Azure Active Directory B2C by sending them a URL to send reset the password. The last one, again, we don't have the password, but instead of setting the password in Azure B2C, we're setting the password in the old identity provider. In all scenarios, we first needed to migrate the users, okay? We run in the first two ones, we run okay. Yeah, in the first two flows, we run a pre-migration process. I mean, we read all the users' data from the old identity provider and we create new account in Azure B2C. Yeah, in the first one, with the real password. In the second one, with a random password we generate. In the last one, we migrate the users when the user change its password in the old identity provider. Okay, let's have a look in the process for more details. Again, this flow fits when you have access to the user's credentials, the user and password clear text. This process involves reading the user from my old identity provider and creating a new account in Azure Active Directory B2C. We change the mobile or web application to use Azure Active Directory B2C. Go live and immediately users can sign into the system because we migrated the users with their password. The second flow, We migrate the users without password and force them to change the password by using B2C. And this process involves, first, reading the user from all the identity provider and create new accounts with random passwords. Okay, you see, the migration process involves a random password. Again, we change a mobile or web application to use B2C, go live, and after go live, we send a link to the end user in order to change their password. In this flow, it's very important to understand, okay, first, we don't have the user credentials. Second, we create the users using a Graph API in order to create the users. We can use a built-in policy or a custom policy. Do you know the difference between built-in policy and custom policies? Okay, good. So we don't need a custom policy in order to run the migration process. We can use a built-in policy and, of course, a custom policy, migrate all users or only pre-selected users. You don't need to migrate all of the users. You can just some of them. User impact. There is a user impact in this scenario because in this scenario, we ask the user to change his password. So user need to change his password. The same in the third scenario, migrate user with password harvesting. Again, this flow fits when you don't have access to the user password. In the old identity provider, ask user to change their password. See over here in the second box, user migrate or password reset, okay? Because in this scenario that you change the password in the old identity provider, okay? User can change his password once, and you created the user, and the second time. On the second time, you don't create the user again, rather, you just change the password in Azure Active Directory B2C.
For folks who have done migrations already, what are you seeing in terms of what the users, what your customers want? Do they have access to the passwords in clear text, or are they okay with doing password resets, or do you, in every case, need to be migrating the passwords as well with approach number 3? Anybody?
They have hash passwords and clear text passwords. They're having issues with users not reaching the service for 3 to 6 months. So sending out emails, they may just get lost in that customer's email, and then when they try to sign on in the future, they're not going to know that they're on a different system. That's why I'm here, to try to find out.
Yeah, chronic problem is that we're moving people from multiple applications, multiple identity stores, and they want to consolidate. So if I've got 4 accounts, I want to get those down to 1 and not move bad data.
That's one of the most significant problems we have. It's when you have multiple apps, different sources of ingress. And another particularly complex area when it comes to migrations is when you have 2 sources of truth. You have your on-prem system that needs to support 3 or 4 apps while they're trying to move 1 or 2 apps over to B2C. So how do you handle the cutover? So those are, again, tricky cases. Anybody else? Also, by the way, feel free to call out questions that you go on.
Well, actually, we have the same situation and one more complexity about passwords. We need to store multiple passwords for the same user. So that's multiple passwords. It's like you have several applications, and each of one application you need a different password, or maybe the same application you have a different level of access and different password for it.
Yeah, so it's an interesting space.
I think it depends on the size and type of the organization. If you have a retailer of, let's say, 150, 200,000 employees, and 95% of the stores and may or may not have access to a computer, they don't want to involve these people to do anything with options 2 or 3. They want to just get it done. So even if the system executes option 1, but then does the password resets for them, and everything, and then distributes that new information to them as well. Exactly. Say, here's your new information. Don't bother me. Don't make 190,000 people do this, because they may not even know how or when or even have access to computer. Or maybe there's one computer in the entire store that 20, 30 people use, right? So there could be another flavor to your options, option 1 plus.
So there's actually a fork, which is just create a new password and give it to the user, right?
Okay, good.
So the question is more around other competing products. You know, you've done a handful of migrations, and we've seen the scenarios too where you've got all of them because you're consolidating from many different places. But a lot of times we've also seen where it's just a competitive nature where they're starting to go away from Auth0, Ping, whoever they're leveraging today. So some of this would be great if we had some quick start approaches to those things too, where we could say maybe 50 or 60, 80% of the scenario will follow a OAuth to Azure AD migration. But then the last scenarios, we have to just do that, just create brand new and start from scratch. So I think that other one there is, you know, I think it would apply to all these options, but we don't have the passwords most likely in those other third-party software scenarios.
So the way we've been doing it is we've started out by providing just straight up sample code and a REST API-based approach. But to your point, absolutely. There are the big industry titans from before who a lot of customers are migrating away from for whatever reason. And being able to do these cookie cutter migration implementations is of huge benefit. And I'm guessing, Chris, you have a point about that as well? Yeah.
So perhaps the fifth scenario we've implemented is we don't change the apps to point to B2C immediately.
Let me go back.
Yep.
Is there one?
Yeah, so we had a scenario where actually the app changed to B2C, but what the customer decided to do was represent their existing logins as an identity provider. So the user it was a bit intrusive from a flow point of view, but they clicked sign in with my Contoso account, which was not a local account. It redirected off to their existing OAuth provider that they'd implemented for themselves. And once that user signed in there was a point in time they had a plain text password, which was otherwise hashed. And that's when they migrated into B2C. And they ran that for a few weeks, and then they cut it over. All right, yep. And what they did was a bit of a blend for all those who didn't sign in over those 3 to 4 weeks. They just got the forced password reset.
Yeah, by the way, you can combine some of the scenarios. For example, you can run the scenario number 3, okay? Harvesting the passwords from the old identity provider and store the password in hash format, and later create the users in Azure Active Directory using the next flow that I like to show you. But before we continue, I'd like to summarize the pre-migration process. Pre-migration process means that we migrate the users before migrating the application to Azure to use Azure Active Directory B2C. Okay, and we have 3 flows. Okay, the first one, if we have the password, we migrate the users and the password. The second one, we migrate the users with a random password. The third one, we migrate the users in the old identity provider set password reset, okay? In the next section, is a just-in-time migration, okay? Just-in-time migration comes to deal in a case you don't have access to the password, but in more efficient way. The process involves custom policy and a call to REST API. The reason that we use custom policy is in order to call a REST API, and I'll show you 2 flows in just-in-time migration. The first one, actually the number 4, pre-migrate user without password and set a password just in time. The 5th one is just-in-time migration. We create the user just in time. So in the first case, I need to run pre-migration. I need to run pre-migration, I don't update the password, and I don't ask the user to update the password. Okay, I don't. When the user tries to sign into the system, we retrieve the username and the password, compare the username and the password, and update just in time. I'll show you immediately. In the fifth approach, we even don't run the pre-migration. When the user tries to sign in or sign up, immediately we create the user and let the user sign into the system. Let me show you. Okay, this is a set password just in time. Again, we first run the pre-migration in order to create the account in Azure Active Directory B2C. But since we don't have the password, you remember we generate a random password and set our random password. Then, when a user, can you see my mouse? Yep, good. So when a user sign in, it types his credentials, email address, and password. So B2C invokes REST API, okay, that we prepare the REST API, and sending two important claims, the sign-in names, and the second one is password. Yeah, it's broken. It's password. On the next step, the REST API, just a second. Okay, good. So again, we run the pre-migration, then on sign-in, user types his credentials, username and password. B2C invokes a REST API. This box is a REST API. REST API first check if this user should migrate, because if we already migrated the user, we don't want to re-migrate it again, okay? Yep, of course.
A little blurb that showed password claim being retrieved from B2C.
Yep.
So what I'm hearing is that we can get the actual password that's applied in
that's
B2C
correct.
and send it out to a.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it's in clear text.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, I must tell you, in the demonstration, I show you that I log some trace to, in order to monitor the process. So don't ever trace any personal information nor the username or password. Again, B2C sends the input claims, password, username, and password. We run following business logic. Okay, should migrate? If no, just return to the control back to B2C. If this user should migrate, okay, does the password match? And now we have the password. Okay, we have the password in clear text. Since we have the password in clear text, we can do a lot with the password. For example, if the password in the old identity provider is stored in hash format, okay, I take the password, compare hash by hash. Very simple. If the old identity provider gives you the opportunity to call a REST API to verify the user credentials, I'm taking the username and password, send them to the old identity provider. If the old identity provider returns true, means the credentials are verified successfully. Okay, the next step, I update the password in the right time. You remember, we already created the account, and this time we update the password and remove the entity from the old identity provider because we don't want to re-migrate the same user time and again. Okay, I'm summarizing. First, pre-migration. We pre-migrate all the users. On the sign-in, we invoke the B2C API. We check if the password should migrate. If should migrate, if password match, update password, and at this moment, user can sign into the system. Okay, for a full just-in-time migration, In order to create the users just in time, we need to do something more, okay? It's not only for sign in, we need to handle the sign up and password reset policy, okay? For all the scenarios, we need to call the REST API, and I'll show you why. First, as you can see, the process is almost the same. Oh, it's my mistake. We don't we don't run the pre-migration. I just copy the slide. Okay, but we don't run the pre-migration in just in time. User sign in, invokes B2C. B2C check if user should migrate. If it should migrate and the password match, create the user account or update the user, depends. If the password is not matched, return a 409 error message telling that B2C that telling the user that the credentials or bad username and password error message. For sign up, again, we just call the REST API, checking if the account exists. If the account exists, we return a 409 error message telling the user the account you provided is already exists. So don't recreate the account again. And for password reset, we need to create the account before user can set his password, and this is the complexity. The account is not exist, okay? Because we didn't run the pre-migration process. And user wants to change his password, he forgot his password, but there is no account. So in this case, we need to create the account with a random password, and then B2C will update the password. Okay. Let's compare the different scenarios we saw. Starting by migrate user with existing password, as I told you, this is the simplest approach. You have the user credentials, you run the pre-migration process, you can use building policy or custom policy, you migrate all the users or only part of the users, no user impact before go live. You should prevent user from updating their password or creating new accounts because you migrate. And again, you can migrate the users in bulks. I mean, a month or 2 months before go live, migrate some of the users and then migrate the rest of the users. And when you finish the migration process, you can shut down the old identity provider immediately after the migration because we don't need the old identity provider anymore. The second one, migrate users with password, force them to change the password via Azure B2C policy reset. Again, we use the pre-migration process, but remember, with a random generated password, you can use built-in policy or custom policy. Users have to go through password reset process, low downtime. You should prevent user from creating new account before go live. And again, you can retire from the old identity provider immediately after the migration process because we don't need the old identity provider anymore. The third one is migrate user with password harvesting. We are not running the pre-migration process, in one time. Rather, we migrate the users when they change their password. And this is important regarding issue regarding this flow. We trust the users. If we have 1 million users and we send 1 million emails to user asking them to change their password in the old system, okay, we expect the user to change their password. If someone, for some reason, didn't change his or her password, it means that his account didn't migrate to Azure B2C. It's a little bit risky. Migrating user with password reset. Again, this is our recommended solution for if you don't have the password. The solution requires a custom policy. The solution involves developing a REST API service called with a simple business logic, as I showed you. Downtime, you cannot retire from the old identity provider since we are relying on the old identity provider. we verify the password with all identity providers. So we take some time until you retire from the old system. A just-in-time migration similar to the set password just-in-time. We don't run the pre-migration at all. Everything is done just-in-time. We create the user just-in-time, but we need to handle the sign-in, sign-up, or password reset policy. Okay, regarding the password policy, I'm continuing. Any question regarding the just-in-time migration flow? Yeah, 1 minute.
Yeah, in any scenario which we are talking about where you have to take care of either a ramp up or just-in-time conversion, that's taking into whatever factors have to be taken for the client in terms of keeping the existing system on, additional licensing costs, because again, at some point you will have to do a hybrid approach. I mean, all of the active users not going to come back in a certain period of time, based on whatever system is being used. So you will have to either leave some customers behind or make a decision based on that. So just the point that there has to be a hybrid approach to a just-in-time or phased migration, right? So just confirming that's how it's being done.
And that's specifically what Chris was describing. In every case where you have a massive migration, you have to be in hybrid state for a while. You keep the on-prem service running or whatever their prior service was running until the bulk of their active users have moved over. And that's a business decision as well. It might be 4 weeks, it might be 6 months. Most of our customers tend to go somewhere between 6 months and a year until the business feels like they're moved over. And then you switch over the remaining users to just a forced password reset. So that's absolutely the approach to go with. Anyone else?
I was going to ask, is there any point in any of the 5 recommended flows where a user authentication will be denied or failed? So if my applications are authenticating or getting tokens or OAuth2, whatever, in this flow, is there any, other than the actual migration, is there any time that people will not be able to access the applications using these tokens? Like if you set a forced password reset flag, and I'm using some device, phone or PDA or something, and I'm not going to be able to get in because I have a forced password event waiting for me, and I have no ability to execute it from the device perspective. So is there any period of time in the migration that my users may not authenticate properly? Or not everything's fine, you can always get access?
There is a low downtime, as you can see on the table, especially with the pre-migration process before you migrate all the users. But with just-in-time migration, there is no downtime. I mean, users just sign in and we create or set the password immediately on the fly. And again, there is always a hybrid solution or combining. For example, I have a solution that I combine flow number 4 and 5 together. So I migrate the users, and if I missed someone, I create the user on the fly. But regarding your question, to be more specific, don't forget that you change the authentication provider. So user will have to download a new application version or sign in again to the web application. This is important. So there is no any existing sessions.
That's a fair point. But also, another tack on your question is, no, there isn't any particular latency between the cutover where you're writing the new user into B2C from where you were in your old system. The username and the password are backed by something we call instant on, but that means it's extra quickly replicated across all of our data centers. So you do have immediate access to authenticate that user who's been migrated against B2C so that you give them a B2C token. So you don't typically need to plan for downtime there.
Password policy. Okay, I didn't say sorry.
So in all these migration flows, we are kind of playing with the password here. So which means that either some portion or all of the password authentication is actually happening on a REST API call, which is maintained by the customer or by an ISP partner like one of us. Is there any particular security practice here or anything that we need to be careful about? Because like this thing comes up with every customer that I'm interacting with. One of the questions they ask is, hey, like now you are doing the password checking all by yourself on a REST API call, and you're not using Azure AD B2C for doing that. Obviously, I'm trying to convince them, yeah, no, that's fine. But if there's Microsoft answer that says, yeah, no, that's what we recommend, then I think that will make our conversations a little bit easier as well.
Yeah. You're talking regarding the REST API, the custom REST API. And the custom REST API can be secured with HTTP basic authentication or with a client certificate. We're about to publish articles how to secure the REST API. So our recommendation is to use client certificates that only B2C servers can invoke your API.
I understand that, but I think the question was, even after, and you are right that the recommended practice need to be certificate-based authentication, there's no question about it. But I guess even after doing certificate-based authentication, running the password verification on a REST API that is custom coded, is that all right? Or is there any specific security measures that needs to be taken there?
Okay.
So yeah, there are recommendations that we should probably publish and put out there in terms of how you do secure the REST API endpoint. One of the things, and I know we've discussed this also, is being able to limit the client IPs that are even allowed to hit the API endpoint. And how do you protect that? So there are some good best practices there, and it's that's homework for us to go and make that happen. So point taken.
What is the security risk, right? Because the REST API is just using an app identity, just finding the application. So for the REST API going from B2C to the REST API is a picture of but then I think here's the question as well, what happens to all the time when it gets wrong? But your REST API is still going to yeah. So that's where you're coming up with what are your best practice recommendations. All right, last question. Yeah, you asked next. And we can do it on.
Okay, so when you were talking about the just-in-time migration, I believe you mentioned that the API would go to the old system and check to see if hash is matched?
Yeah.
Or would you actually send the authentication or the credentials to the API or to the legacy system that you are replacing? And it would determine whether or not the password was correct, because I'm assuming you wouldn't have the hash that that application has. Right? You wouldn't have, I mean, because if you did, you could just take that hash and put it into your own directory and check it there. You wouldn't even need to reach out to the legacy system.
It depends on the old system. If, for example, the old system can export all the email address with a hash password format, so the API will compare hash by hash. Eventually, you should know that B2C, when B2C invokes the REST API, it sends the username and password in clear text. Later, you can do whatever you want with the credentials. You can hash them and compare the hash. You can send them to the old system in order to verify the credentials.
I'm just familiar with another AM technology where you can actually, as long as there would be certain encryption methodologies and hash methodologies that are supported, if you had the private key, you could bring the hashes over and just read the old passwords.
So there is work that our feature team is working on to improve that specific aspect, particularly around not needing to have an internet-facing REST API endpoint. So we aren't necessarily going down the path yet of being able to bring your own hash algorithm yet. But we should have more information about that coming up. As far as B2C is concerned, today that API endpoint is a black box. We send you the creds, you can do whatever the heck you want with it. All we get back is a Boolean. Are the creds valid or not? If you say yes, we issue a token. That's it. All right, you want to move on?
Yeah, we're planning a slight variation on the just-in-time one, and the fact that, we're just going to get them to re-register, and we're going to trust that the email address that they give us, from Facebook or what they've registered with is valid, and then we just go and get their old details via the API based on the email address. So we don't actually care what the old password was.
Are you verifying the email address?
So when they log in, so when they re-register, if they've come via Facebook, we trust that, that's the correct email address. Or if they kind of re-register and enter username and password and they verify that email address, we know it's theirs. So we just go and get their old details and populate it directly from that.
That worries me a little bit.
Okay. Password policy. If you migrate accounts that use less restrict password policy, for example, 111, 127, okay, it's not a complex password. You need also to, when you set the password or create the account, you should disable strong password policy on Azure Active Directory. It's important, unless B2C will not allow you to create account with a less complex password. Social migrations. There is no, 1 second. Okay, there's no direct migration path for a social migration. What we can do with social migration, with social accounts, you can update the social account after the first sign up using this flow. Okay, on sign up or sign in, when the user first sign in or sign up with a social account before create the new account in Azure B2C, B2C invokes REST API, reads the profile, returns the claim back to B2C, and creates the user an issue access token. Because we don't, in social identity provider, we don't have the user credentials, so it's much more simple. So we don't need to pre-migrate the user. On the first time, for example, if user uses a Facebook or Google account, on the first time you click sign in with Facebook account, B2C will call our REST API, we read the information from the identity provider, send them back to B2C. End user can change his profile and create the account in Azure B2C. Graph API, we had a session just an hour ago regarding Graph API, so I'll focus only on one thing regarding Graph API. If we want to set the user password or delete accounts from Azure Active Directory, we do need to set permission, user account administrator permission. So this is a PowerShell we provide you in order to set the permission to the application. Why we need this PowerShell? Again, first to set user's password, and second, if you may run some tests and you want to clean up your environment, so you want to delete all the users you create during your tests, in order to delete those users, your application needs this permission. User account administrator, run this PowerShell, just change your application ID over here and run the PowerShell code. Okay, in this demo, I'm going to show you the pre-migration process. As an example, I have JSON file, but it can be a SQL server or any other database. Just I use a JSON file, and for each and every user, I specify the email, display name, first name, last name, and the password, because I do have the password in clear text. So this is my password, 1 to 7. I run the product. That's all. If I go back to Azure B2C, you will see those users over, for example, Emily, King. So let's take Emily as an example. Navigating to the web application, sign up or sign in. And I'm in. Okay, it's very simple. We migrate the users. And by the way, the migration process, I run it, you can run it in parallel, okay, in order to make the process much more faster than in this demo. When I provide you the code will continue the parallel option in order to run it much more faster. I'm signing out. Now we'll see the just-in-time migration. So first, I need to clean up my environment. Good. And if you remember, we don't have the user password. In this example, use hash. I took the number 1 to 7, I hash the password, and this is a password, which means that I cannot set this password, and the migration tool will generate a random password. So let's run it. I just point the application to use this file, just in time. I'm sorry. Sorry. I need to change. So if I take the user and I try to sign in, I'll get a bad password because it's just a generated password that I prepare. So in order to sign in, we need a custom policy. So we'll upload the custom policy. I'll show you the policy later. This custom policy invoke a REST API. Okay. Sign in. Let's take a GEMS as an example. First call to the REST API takes time. Good, and I mean, so what we did in the second demo, we first pre-migrate the users to Azure Active Directory B2C with a random generated password. Then we will upload a custom policy. This custom policy invokes the REST API. The REST API receives the email address and the password, compare, first check if the user need to be migrated, okay? If need to be migrated, compare the password. If there is a match between the password, the REST API update the user account, again, with an application permission as administrator, and then the user continue with the sign-in. It took a long time because it was my first call, and the second call, it was a matter of 1 or 2 seconds, and that's all.
How are you setting the status for is the user need to be migrated or not as an attribute in the directory?
Oh, good question. In my demonstration, I've created an Azure table, okay? And I keep the record on Azure tables. After the user sign in for the first time, I just remove the entity. But you can store the information in Azure Active Directory, but I think it's not a good practice. You should store the status or in the already TD provider or in a custom database like Azure Table or SQL Server.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Some of our customers have talked about the consumption of account information, right? So in that process, you're using it or storing that password at some point in time. You're controlling it, right? So, I mean, it's different if you're in an application that already does that to begin with and you're working with a database, but coming from a service that you don't maybe have that today, or it's a hash password. You know, the concepts of security and potentially having some back door of taking that password and putting it out somewhere else and storing that information still is a concern. Have you come across that with any of your migrations with your customers throughout that, like, just-in-time process?
It's not a pattern. Yeah, that's exactly where we are on that. Yeah, it is what it is. We look at it in terms of better us than you. Yes. And that's as far as it goes. Yes. Yes. We'll publish these slides. Also, all the scripts and policies that we're showing here today, we'll have it up on Git, and then Yoel's published a few blogs about this as well. So
yeah,
all of this is available.
There are also some hidden slides that get you out to run the solution, configure the application, and everything.
But in general, the thing we're hearing from the session today here is, while you guys understand the approach, you'd like to see some more robust phrasing from Microsoft in terms of why this is considered to be a secure way to do it. So, yeah.
Okay, just regarding the policy, this is a technical profile. You can see it on technical profile. It calls the REST API and sending the sign-in name into a claim name email and the password. It's sent to the REST API. On the login process, B2C calls the technical profile, local account, user migration, and validate the user. I will not see the code. So user migration, as we saw with Graph API, you can migrate users in variety of ways. And again, you can combine, or having a hybrid solution, you can migrate some of the users before running just in time for only some of the user or some of the application. It depends on the situation, depends on the application and the identity provider that you use, but you can use Graph API in order to create the users or pre-migration with password or without the password, or just running the migration just in time in two ways. First, create the account before and setting the password just in time, or creating the password, creating the user just in time.